Hello friends, and welcome back to R Slash ProRevenge. Today we have two hot stories, so let's begin. You picked on the wrong underdog guy. Someone just linked me to this sub, and ooh boy do I have a story for you guys. I'm still proud of this to this day. Obligatory throwaway disclaimer, and all names are changed. A few years ago I was working at a job I really enjoyed with a team I really gelled with. There were about 5 of us working on the same portfolio of projects in different roles, and every single team member was just cream of the crop, incredibly good at what they do. I can't overemphasize how satisfying it was to work with such an incredibly competent, likable group of people. In this job, instead of getting the Sunday night blues, I would get excited thinking about the work I would be doing the next day and planning how we would solve the complex problems together. It was like a series of logic puzzles. Yes, I realize I'm a huge nerd. I promise I also have a life outside of work. The one downside, there's always a downside, to this job was Steve. Steve was not in the supervisory line for me or any of my team members, but he was about 3 levels above us and very senior. He'd been there for years and was tight with the senior leadership. Steve was also a mega creep. He said extremely inappropriate things to young women in the office, and he apparently wasn't averse to being handsy, though as far as anyone knew, that was as bad as it had gotten. The women in the office all knew to steer clear of him. My first week on the job, the Whisper Network made sure I knew never be alone with Steve. Sexual harassment is difficult to document, and nobody wanted to risk their career and put a target on their back going after a big guy like Steve, so he just got away with it for years. So for a couple of years, I followed this advice. There were a few instances of Steve saying incredibly uncomfortable things to me in passing, but for the most part, I managed to avoid him. Then I found out that my teammate Rob had gotten on Steve's radar. For context, Rob is non-neurotypical and has some minor tickish behavior. He's also shy and easily spirals into social anxiety when put in uncomfortable situations. So one evening at our team's informal weekly happy hour after work, Rob lets it slip that Steve's been giving him a hard time. The rest of us are like, whoa, wait, what? Because Steve never interacts with staff at our level except to creep on women. And we basically make Rob tell us everything. Basically, for the last few weeks, Steve has been bullying Rob, making fun of his tics and mimicking his way of speaking back to him. He's also been asking Rob how he can possibly be competent to do his job and implying he's a pity hire. Once he called him a retard. It's clear Steve is seeking out Rob for this because, again, there's really no reason for him to interact with our team. Rob has been having horrible anxiety over this situation and has had bad insomnia and stomach issues since Steve started targeting him. And not that it bears repeating, but just to reiterate, Rob is a effing beast at his job and a genuinely good guy. At this point, I'm seeing red. We all were. We tell Rob to go to HR, that his neurological issues put him in a protected ADA class, and he could get Steve in big trouble. Rob panics and says he can't do that, begs us not to tell anyone at work, and says he wishes he hadn't said anything. We assure him we won't say anything if that's what he wants, but we're all very distressed. I leave the bar fuming, just thinking, okay, that's it. F you, Steve, you're going down. I can't tell anyone about what's happening to Rob because I promised him as much, so I start my own paper trail. I start baiting Steve, and I don't mean I behave in a suggestive manner or lead him on. I just stop avoiding him, and I even initiate contact myself. I IM him through the company's IM system very professionally, politely, asking if a big client will be staying on through the next project cycle, and the floodgates open. He starts sending me outrageously sexual IMs. I mostly don't respond, but I occasionally keep him going by sending extremely literal responses to his innuendo-laden questions or pretending not to understand something suggestive he's saying. Sometimes when he clarifies, I'll outright say, "This isn't appropriate," or "This is making me uncomfortable," or "Please don't say things like that, Steve." But he steamrolls right over me. During this time, I've also been seeing him more in person around the office, and he often says gross stuff to me in person as well. A lot of it is not just inappropriate, but bizarre and nonsensical. Is it legal to have a butt like that in that skirt? LOL, what? Every time this happens, I immediately go back to my desk and write down what he said, the date and time, and the names of any witnesses. After about a month and change of this, I compile my creep journal with printouts of the IM conversations and take them to my HR rep. I ask to file a sexual harassment complaint against Steve. As soon as the words sexual harassment leave my mouth, my rep instantly gets the head of HR and 2 other reps, and they go through my evidence with me and ask me a ton of questions. The head of HR assures me they'll take my complaints very seriously and asks if I know any women around the office who have had similar issues with Steve. I'm able to give them several names. They send me on my way, and 2 weeks later, my rep formally reaches out to me and lets me know Steve has been let go. Much jubilation is had around the office. It took a couple of months for me to piece together the whole story, but basically after my complaint, HR started following up with the names I gave them, both the witnesses to my in-person encounters with Steve and the other women he'd harassed. They corroborated what I'd told HR, and then through them, word started spreading around the office that HR was conducting a sexual harassment investigation against Steve. This emboldened at least 15 different women who'd been biting their tongues about Steve for ages to come forward and tell their own Steve stories. The worst story was from a junior staff member who Steve had sexually assaulted at a company party the year prior. During all of this, IT had been asked to go through Steve's emails and IMs, and this had not only been used to validate my printouts as legitimate, but IT had found a ton of additional incriminating stuff in Steve's correspondences. Somewhat frustrating, Steve received an extremely generous severance package as part of his termination, but on the bright side, word got around the industry quickly, and Steve was poison at that point. No company would touch him with a 10-foot pole. The last time I thought to snoop on his public social media pages, he was listing himself as an independent consultant in our industry, which I seriously doubt he's actually doing. And based on his public Facebook page, he's doing a couple of MLMs, so that should also kill whatever savings he has in short order. I don't work with Rob anymore, but I did recently attend his wedding. He's extremely happy with his new wife, who is a sweet and lovely woman and is doing really well in his career. Try to fail me. See what it gets you. Okay, so in 9th grade, I had one of my favorite teachers of all time teaching biology. He was known for his extremely long and difficult packets, but everyone loved him anyway. He was one of those people who can make any assignment or subject seem easy because everyone was having far too much fun to notice how much they were learning. His TA, however, was another story. She had this internal power struggle going on 24/7, and she disliked me immediately when I first walked into class. We'll call her Miss B. Anyway, I began to notice that Miss B lost a much higher percentage of the assignments I turned in than anyone else, except for a friend of mine who was also on her naughty list. I began writing the date on every assignment I did, having the teacher sign it, and scanning it into my computer. Miss B knew nothing about this, and instead of just printing out my scan of an assignment when she lost it, I would just complete and turn it in again, once again getting it signed and scanned. Side note, Miss B was also one of the lunchtime hall monitors, those people who go around and try to keep a couple hundred middle schoolers in check at once. At least that was what she was supposed to be doing. Instead, she completely ignored everyone else and blatantly followed me around, systematically adding each and every one of my hiding spots to the not allowed list. Me being awkward and asocial, preferring to read books than be a normal person and talk to people. Anyway, the end of the year rolls around and the final packet looms ahead. It's the biggest and most difficult of the lot. It's also worth around 40% of that term's grade. Being very wary of this TA's BS, I finished and turned it in 2 weeks before it was due. Wouldn't you know, she lost it. This was repeated 7 times. I crap you not. True to my method, I redid it each time, and on the 7th time, the day the packet was actually due, I turned it in directly to the teacher and asked him to input the score manually, which he was nice enough to do for me. My grade secure, I then went home, printed out a 6-inch pile of lost assignments, and brought them to the office the next day. I reported her, and when she was called down to the office to report, she was smug as hell, telling me to prove it then, trouble. That was her nickname for me. Her face when I pulled this mound of paper out of my backpack was the most priceless and satisfying thing I'd ever seen. The grades were locked by then, so I was off the hook, and she was nearly fired, eventually being reinstated, but under close inspection. Last week, I revisited the school, where she's apparently still working, It's what sparked the memory, and I tried not to laugh when I walked into the biology room to catch up with the teacher, watching her face literally purple with rage from the corner of the room. Well, thanks for listening. If you like the stories, don't forget to subscribe and like, and see you soon.